The Last of Us Part 2 running on the PS4 is truly impressive. The environment, realism, advanced AI systems, and dynamic audio is just the tip of the iceberg of the insane details that the developers at Naughty Dog added inside this game, which runs on a console that was already 7 years old by the time it came out. And funny enough, just a few months later the PS5 was going to release. So why didn't they exclusively release it on the PS5? Well, it took Naughty Dog over 6 years to create the game. So back in 2014 when they started, the PS5 wasn't even considered yet. Now if you look at how long they spent on creating the first part, it's pretty obvious that the second part is twice as big. Believe it or not, but at first the team actually considered not making a sequel at all. They felt Joel and Ellie's ending at the hospital was perfect, and they were terrified of ruining it with a quick cash grab sequel. Sony executives told the studio they had a blank check, meaning if they wanted to make The Last of Us Part 2, Sony would fund it. But if they wanted to walk away and build a completely new franchise from scratch, Sony would support that too. So even though the creators had freedom to walk away, they kept creating what-if scenarios inside their head, which led them to secretly write concepts of a sequel to the story. So when it came time to pitch the story to the developers and leads at Naughty Dog headquarters, many developers didn't like the idea. There were massive debates in the office about whether the audience would just completely reject the game. But once they took their time to read the idea, they were absolutely shocked. The game would be very emotional with intense anger. So instead of backing down from that, the team embraced the idea to make the player feel every bit of that emotional story. So the studio went into complete lockdown mode, officially starting development. For a long time, the public had absolutely no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Naughty Dog managed to keep the project a total secret until December 2016, where at the PlayStation Experience event they released the first trailer. Because Naughty Dog had hid the plot entirely, the internet spent the next 3 years coming up with crazy theories. Now, although the PS4 gave the developers much more room compared to the PS3, they still had a few bottlenecks. The PS4's processor had 8 different cores that were originally designed to handle much lighter tasks, which made it easy to run smaller games like Metal Gear Solid. But The Last of Us Part 2 would be 4 times larger in file size and required far more complex calculations to run. On top of that, to make the game feel incredibly realistic, they invented motion matching, where instead of just playing a simple walking animation, the game constantly analyzed Ellie's speed, direction and uneven ground beneath her. For every single frame, the CPU had to scan countless of data to create the perfect animation. Now because the console's CPU was so weak, trying to calculate all of this math for multiple enemies plus Ellie at 30 frames per second was just too much. So for that they used standby brains that were only used on enemies that were close to the player, saving them massive amounts of memory. Unlike the first part where players were tied to the story and couldn't explore the world openly, for the sequel they wanted something similar like GTA 5, where players could explore anywhere they wanted. While doing such thing was definitely possible using different cooling methods, the developers still refused to do so, mainly because of the story. If the world would become too big, players would spend hours just wandering around empty fields, and this ruined the scary cinematic tension they wanted to go for. So instead of one giant map, they built a series of smaller, contained ones. These areas still feel pretty big, giving players plenty of time to explore empty buildings. However, the game still forces you towards a specific exit to start the next story. As you guys know, the first game contains no loading screens, but since the sequel is much bigger, the developers were forced to secretly add little loading screens. Many blockades like heavy doors Ellie has to turn a crank to open or narrow walls to squeeze through are secretly loading screens which slow the player down, giving time to the hard drive to load the next zone. So while the developers were figuring out the code, the audio department was dealing with many emotions too. Because the script was so dark, the voice actors and sound designers had to spend days inside a quiet room recording booths, capturing pretty unsettling sounds. For the enemies that scream out their friends' names when they're gone, the audio team had to record hundreds of variations of these screams. Voice actors had to repeatedly conjure up genuine sounds of grief in front of their microphone. The developers admitted in interviews that listening to hours of raw, unedited audio of people screaming in such way took a heavy psychological toll on them. It became so intense that the team had to frequently take breaks just to clear the mood. Even though the process was pretty draining, from Naughty Dog's perspective they believed they were doing the right thing, since this was exactly what the story was all about. They believed that if the audio team and the actors weren't feeling heavily emotional in the real world, that the player behind the screen while playing the game wouldn't feel it either. And it makes sense when you think about it. Since those cutscenes are based on real life interactions, the performance of the actors is extremely important. But, quick question, because I'm genuinely wondering, did you guys feel emotional while playing the game? Because besides millions of players loving this game, it also received a lot of backlash. Mainly because of Joel's fate and being forced to play as Abby. Players hated the character so much that it even got to the point where the actor who played Abby received death threats on social media. The developers didn't expect to get this much backlash and were pretty shocked by it. But what's interesting is that the backlash already started before the game even got released to the public. On April 2020, a few months before the official release date, rumors circulated that a Naughty Dog employee leaked the game as revenge for brutal working hours and withheld pay. Because Naughty Dog was already known in the industry for forcing extreme overtime on their employees, the internet straight off believed that this story was real. However, later it turned out that it was fake. The real story was about a group of hackers who discovered a security flaw in the code of Naughty Dog's servers. Through those flaws, they were able to bypass the entire system and secretly download over a terabyte of internal development data, which included early gameplay footage and cutscenes from the game. The leak started spreading everywhere, and texts like "Joel is killed by a new character named Abby, you then have to play as Abby for half of the game," made thousands of players furious, assuming the developers had simply ruined the franchise for a quick cash grab. And remember how I said that before starting development, the developers didn't want the game to feel like a quick cash grab? Well, because of this leak, that nightmare suddenly became true. And from this point it only got worse. People were so furious that they started creating brand new accounts with plot points as their username just to spread more hate on the internet. But just a day after this massive leak, Sony suddenly announced a new rushed release date for June 2020. They realized that the game had to get out before things would only get worse. So despite the massive amount of backlash, people still bought the game when it finally released. 2 years later, the game officially crossed over 10 million copies sold. So even though the game was a massive success, the fanbase had split in two groups that still argue with each other to this day. One group who viewed the game as a masterpiece, and the other who never forgave Naughty Dog for what they did to Joel. Whether people bought it because they loved it or just to see if it was as bad as the internet said, the game was still a big hit. Whether you love or hate the game, you can't deny the fact that it's visually one of the best games on the PS4. Making the first part wasn't easy either. And if you'd like to see how they did that, then you can watch this video. But before doing so, if you'd like to grow your own channel and learn how to edit similar like me, then you can join my course that contains live footage of me editing, so you can copy me step by step. And also have one-on-one coaching from me to grow your channel. You can join through the link in the description down below. Now, this was it for today's video. I really want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see ya in the next one.